The glaring, blinding halogens of the central octagon cast harsh, intersecting, razor-sharp shadows across the blood-stained canvas, illuminating the stark, inescapable contrast between the two figures standing center stage, bathed in a pool of unforgiving white light. The crowd surrounding them was a deafening oceanic roar, a tidal wave of bloodlust, deep-seated skepticism, and raw, unadulterated frenzy, their collective breath hanging thick, heavy, and metallic in the hyper-refrigerated air of the underground arena. Every single seat in the house was packed to the rafters. Every eye was dilated with anticipation. Every voice was screaming for a brutal, immediate massacre. On one side of the cage stood Marcus, the Sovereign Thorn, a heavily muscled, terrifyingly precise professional black belt, his lips curled into a deep sneer of pure, unadulterated contempt that twisted his conventionally handsome features into a grotesque mask of absolute cruelty. His skin gleamed with expensive, imported warm-up oils, his imposing posture screaming an arrogance born of unearned wealth, unchecked privilege, and a lifetime of systemic entitlement, looking down at the challenger as if she were nothing more than worthless dirt beneath his custom-fitted, sponsor-laden, gold-trimmed fight shorts. He was a manufactured titan of the sport, a man who had never known the bitter, humbling taste of defeat, who had never felt the crushing, suffocating weight of societal insignificance, who moved with the predatory, lazy confidence of a well-fed lion locked inside a cage full of trembling lambs. Opposite him stood Maya, a profound study in absolute contrast, quiet, still, entirely unassuming. Her worn, gray, heavily washed hand wraps were frayed at the edges, telling silent, desperate stories of 1,000 lonely, agonizing hours spent punching bags in the dark, her dark skin completely matte against the overwhelming, blinding glare of the multi-million-dollar spotlight array, her dark eyes locked onto the hollow of his collarbone with a terrifyingly calm, absolute, unshakable focus. She did not pace the canvas like a caged animal. She did not beat her chest for the cameras. She simply breathed, drawing in a slow, rhythmic, hypnotic pull of air like a patient predator waiting for the heavy steel door to finally, inevitably, swing wide open. He leaned in close, his massive, hulking frame casting a suffocating dark shadow completely over her slight figure, his voice a guttural, venomous, scraping whisper against the rising, deafening noise of the bloodthirsty, jeering crowd, whispering words deliberately meant to break her psyche, meant to remind her of her supposed place at the bottom of the hierarchy, meant to cruelly crush the very spirit out of her lungs before the referee even signaled the start. "You do not belong here, little girl," he hissed, his hot breath practically visible in the chill air, the nearby highly sensitive parabolic microphone barely catching the cruel, jagged edge of his tone, broadcasting his malice to the select few close enough to hear the venom. "You are far too weak for this brutal world. You are far too small for this cage, and I am going strictly to break you in half so the whole wide world can see exactly what a pathetic joke you truly are." She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't even shift a single ounce of her weight. She just stared right through the center of his chest, seeing entirely past the bulging muscles, seeing completely past the arrogant facade, seeing right through the carefully constructed, heavily marketed myth of his invincibility. And then, the bell rang, a sharp, piercing metallic shriek that shattered the suffocating tension into a million jagged, invisible pieces. Man, listen to me right now. If you are sitting there thinking you know exactly how this whole thing ends, if you think you have seen this classic underdog story play out before on your phone screen or your television, you have absolutely no idea what happened next. Stay with me, lock your eyes on this screen, and do not dare look away for a single second, because this isn't just another fight. This is a complete and total dismantling of an empire, a masterclass in righteous vindication, and you desperately need to see every single bone-crushing, earth-shattering second of it to truly believe it. To understand the sheer magnitude of the impact that was about to occur, you have to rewind the clock and step into the sensory deprivation of Maya's actual reality, a reality built completely entirely in the unseen, unglamorous shadows of the inner city. Her daily life was anchored by the suffocating smell of cheap bleach and old, rotting leather inside her Uncle Silas's subterranean, crumbling basement gym, a place where the air was always thick with the heavy humidity of desperate sweat and deferred dreams. The floorboards of the makeshift ring apron were splintered, cracked, and uneven, groaning in a mournful, rhythmic protest under the relentless, repetitive impact of her calloused bare feet. Every single morning, long before the sun even considered cresting the smog-choked skyline, The only sound echoing down the deserted, freezing alleyways was the sharp, slicing thwack, thwack, thwack of her skipping rope, cutting through the frigid, unforgiving air. She trained when the brutal winter cold seeped deep into the marrow of her bones, leaving her fingers stiff and numb. She trained when the blistering summer heat turned the unventilated basement into a suffocating, oxygen-starved furnace that made every drawn breath feel like inhaling hot glass. Maya was the purest definition of an overlooked underdog, a diligent, remarkably pure-hearted young woman who fought not for personal glory, not for lucrative brand sponsorships, and certainly not for social media validation, but for the fundamental, non-negotiable right to simply exist and be respected in a space that actively, aggressively tried to push her out. The world outside those peeling cinder block walls constantly looked right past her, dismissing her quiet demeanor as weakness, her small stature as fragility, and her stoic silence as an utter lack of fighting spirit. The established martial arts community, a deeply entrenched boys' club built on loud bravado and performative masculinity, viewed her mere presence as an insulting novelty, a cute little side story not worthy of main event consideration. Yet she absorbed their condescending smirks, their patronizing pats on the head, and their thinly veiled insults, taking every single ounce of that toxic energy and methodically converting it into raw, highly concentrated kinetic fuel. She didn't complain about the lack of modern equipment. She didn't whine about the heavy bags held together by layers of frayed, silver duct tape. She simply wrapped her battered hands, lowered her chin, and threw another 1,000 identical, perfectly torqued punches into the unforgiving canvas of the heavy bag, her knuckles perpetually bruised, her spirit completely unbreakable, her entire existence a quiet, persistent rebellion against a society that demanded she remain small, submissive, and invisible. Meanwhile, entirely across town, hovering miles above the gritty streets in a completely different stratosphere of existence, Marcus Thorne was actively living a life completely insulated by impenetrable walls of wealth, privilege, and systemic protection. His training facility was a state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar, glass-enclosed architectural marvel that smelled exclusively of expensive eucalyptus aromatics, sterile industrial cleaners, and cold, hard, undisputed corporate cash. He didn't just have trainers. He had a massive, highly paid entourage of sycophantic yes-men, personal nutritionists, bespoke sports psychologists, and aggressive public relations managers who carefully curated his every public move to maximize his monstrous profitability. Marcus was arrogant to his very core, a man who had been told he was a genetic god since he was a teenager, a man whose massive physical gifts were constantly reinforced by a system designed perfectly to elevate men exactly like him, while actively suppressing anyone who dared challenge the established visual archetype of a champion. He spent his recovery hours lounging in space-age, hyperbaric cryotherapy chambers, casually sipping designer alkaline water, completely disconnected from the fundamental, raw, ugly reality of actual combat, viewing his opponents not as human beings with beating hearts and desperate dreams, but as mere stepping stones placed specifically for his inevitable, glorious ascension. He was a bully cloaked in expensive designer athletic wear, using his undeniable size and terrifying power to physically and psychologically break lesser-known fighters, enjoying the cruel, sadistic thrill of imposing his will on those who lacked the resources to properly defend themselves. His technique was indeed sharp, terrifyingly so, but it was completely devoid of soul, entirely lacking the desperate, primal, life-or-death hunger that only true struggle can forge in the fires of adversity. The inevitable collision course between these two diametrically opposed universes was finally set into motion during a highly publicized, supposedly completely open-door, mixed martial arts community outreach event hosted at a neutral mid-tier training facility in the heart of the city. Maya was there quietly, respectfully mopping down the peripheral training mats after hours, earning a meager few extra dollars to help keep the lights strictly on at Uncle Silas's struggling gym, completely minding her own business with her headphones tightly in. Marcus had arrived nearly 3 hours late with a trailing phalanx of aggressive cameramen, loudly demanding the entire main floor be immediately cleared for a highly staged promotional sparring session. When an older, highly respected, but physically declining local instructor politely asked Marcus to simply wait 5 short minutes for a youth class to safely finish their stretching routine, Marcus didn't just refuse. He violently, cruelly shoved the older man to the mat, laughing a booming, hollow, heartless laugh as his massive entourage loudly cheered the disgusting display of unchecked disrespect. Maya dropped her mop. The heavy wooden handle clattered loudly against the concrete floor, a sharp, echoing crack that instantly silenced the entire, previously chaotic room. She stepped forward, her movements impossibly fluid, her face an unreadable, stony mask of absolute, terrifying calm, placing her small, wrapped frame directly between the towering, sneering giant and the frightened, humiliated older instructor. Marcus looked down at her, his eyes widening briefly in genuine shock before narrowing into slits of pure, unadulterated, venomous amusement. He mocked her frayed clothes. He mocked her size. He openly, loudly mocked her gender, leaning down into the camera lenses to declare to the thousands, streaming the feed live, that she was far too weak, far too frail, and far too pathetic to ever step onto a real combat mat. He threw down an open, deeply condescending public challenge for an officially sanctioned, televised fight, entirely intending to use her as a viral, bloody punching bag to violently humiliate the local community and permanently boost his own vicious, terrifying aura. She did not raise her voice. She did not puff out her chest. She simply stared directly into his arrogant, smirking eyes, her voice completely steady, chillingly soft, and cutting right through the heavy silence of the shocked room. "I accept." The words hung in the air, a definitive, irrevocable contract sealed in the presence of undeniable hubris. In the chaotic, terrifyingly uncertain aftermath of that viral confrontation, it was the deeply grounding, ancient presence of Uncle Silas that kept the overwhelming pressure from completely crushing Maya's focus. Silas was a man carved entirely out of aged mahogany and hard-earned wisdom, his rough, scarred hands telling the story of 100 forgotten street fights and 1,000 quiet, unsung gym victories. He sat her down on a splintered wooden bench in the darkest corner of their basement gym, the single, flickering overhead bulb casting long, solemn shadows across his deeply lined, expressive face. He didn't offer empty, hollow platitudes. He didn't tell her that pure heart alone would magically conquer Marcus's overwhelming, terrifying physical advantages. He looked her dead in the eyes and delivered the cold, hard, unvarnished truth. "He is faster than you. He is stronger than you. He has a system entirely built to protect him," Silas rasped, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated right through the dusty floorboards. "Anger will completely blind you. Righteous indignation will merely get you knocked out cold in the first 3 seconds. You cannot fight his overwhelming power. You cannot fight his massive size. You must fight his blinding arrogance. You must become a ghost. You must become entirely a consequence of his own inevitable, fatal mistakes." Silas began the painstaking, agonizingly precise process of stripping away everything Maya thought she knew about fighting, breaking her completely down to the fundamental, absolute biomechanics of human movement, focusing entirely on leverage, absolute timing, and the devastating power of redirecting an opponent's massive kinetic energy against them. They did not spar with heavy, swinging brawlers. They focused on micro-movements, on the exact precise angle of a slipping shoulder, on the infinitesimal, split-second shift of weight required to effortlessly vanish exactly when a devastating strike arrived, turning the basement into a laboratory of highly calculated, geometric destruction. The preparation phase transitioned into a methodical, obsessive, dangerously solitary montage of extreme, punishing dedication that pushed Maya right to the absolute ragged edge of total human endurance. She wasn't just blindly training, she was exhaustively, obsessively studying Marcus, watching highly degraded, pirated tapes of his previous brutal fights on a tiny, cracked smartphone screen until her eyes burned and watered in the dark. She watched him crush opponent after opponent, searching desperately, relentlessly for the microscopic, entirely hidden flaw in his seemingly impenetrable, terrifying armor. And then, in the freezing, dead silence of a Tuesday morning at 3 a.m., she finally saw it. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible biomechanical habit, a deeply ingrained, unconscious twitch born entirely of his overconfidence and his complete lack of respect for his opponent's counter-striking ability. Whenever Marcus threw his devastating, fight-ending right power hook, a punch that had legitimately put heavily muscled heavyweights into deep comas, he habitually, lazily, dropped his left hand exactly 2 inches for a fraction of a millisecond to generate unnecessary, flashy extra torque. It was a microscopic window of vulnerability, a fleeting, dangerous gap that no other fighter had ever been fast enough, calm enough, or brave enough to properly exploit. Once the flaw was identified, the training shifted into a terrifying, singular, obsessive focus, drilling the exact, highly specific counter-movement thousands upon thousands of times until it was no longer a conscious thought, but a deeply embedded, involuntary nervous system reflex. Slip to the outside, pivot sharply on the lead foot, drop the center of gravity drastically, and launch the upward counter-strike with the entire, unbridled kinetic chain of the body behind it. Thwack, pivot, strike, over and over and over. Her knuckles bled through the wraps. Her shins ached with deep, throbbing bone bruises. Her lungs burned with the terrifying, agonizing fire of absolute exhaustion. But she refused to stop, refused to rest, driven completely by the righteous, burning necessity of the coming vindication. Yet as the date of the massive, highly publicized fight drew nearer, the crushing, systemic injustice of the established martial arts world aggressively reared its ugly, bureaucratic head, desperately trying to suffocate the match before the bell could even ring. The notoriously corrupt athletic commission, heavily pressured by Marcus's wealthy, panicked promoters who suddenly feared the optics of their golden goose fighting an unknown woman, suddenly, miraculously, found irregularities in Maya's submitted medical paperwork. They loudly claimed, behind closed mahogany doors, that she was totally unmarketable, that she was a massive, dangerous liability, and that sanctioning such a wildly mismatched fight would ruin the integrity of the sacred sport. They threatened to permanently pull her hard-earned fighting license. They aggressively threatened to permanently condemn Uncle Silas's gym for minor fabricated code violations. The sheer, suffocating weight of the massive bureaucracy was a terrifying, invisible opponent far larger and far more dangerous than Marcus himself, actively trying to crush her spirit and force her to quietly withdraw to save the fragile ego of the reigning, privileged champion. The systemic pushback was brutal, relentless, and seemingly insurmountable, leaving Maya sitting alone in the dark basement, the crippling, heavy weight of systemic inequality pressing firmly down on her weary shoulders, wondering if the fight was already completely lost before she even had a chance to step into the blinding lights. Just as the crushing weight of the corrupt commission seemed completely poised to permanently cancel the bout and silence Maya forever, a totally unexpected, highly disruptive, high-status ally dramatically intervened, fundamentally changing the entire trajectory of the narrative. Elias Vance, a legendary, retired, undisputed world champion, and now a fiercely independent, extremely wealthy fight promoter, known for his absolute intolerance of systemic bullying, had quietly, anonymously, seen the viral footage of the gym confrontation. He had seen the terrifying, absolutely chilling calm in Maya's eyes, recognizing the unmistakable, dangerous fire of a true, generational predator that the suits and the bureaucrats completely failed to comprehend. Vance literally crashed the commission's final closed-door hearing, his massive, imposing presence immediately silencing the panicked, sweating executives sitting around the polished mahogany table. He didn't ask for their permission. He threw down a massive, undeniable, multi-million-dollar certified check of his own personal money to fully sanction, fully ensure, and independently broadcast the fight, loudly threatening to publicly, ruthlessly expose the commission's blatant, disgusting cowardice and rampant corruption to his millions of loyal followers if they dared try to block it. He looked directly at the stammering, terrified head commissioner and stated, with a voice like cracking thunder, that true martial arts was entirely about heart, discipline, and the great equalizer of the mat, not about protecting the fragile egos of pampered, manufactured silver spoon champions. The tide violently, abruptly turned, the bureaucratic red tape was instantly, magically incinerated by the sheer power of Vance's unassailable influence, and the fight was officially, definitively, locked in, setting the grand stage for the ultimate, highly public reckoning. Which finally brings us right back to the terrifying, suffocating tension of the present moment, back to the glaring lights, the deafening roar, and the absolute, terrifying silence of Maya's focused mind as the bell's sharp shriek finally echoed through the arena. The instant the sound registered, Marcus charged. He did not cautiously feel out the distance. He did not show a single, solitary ounce of respect for his opponent. He erupted forward like a massive, terrifyingly fast runaway freight train, roaring a guttural, arrogant scream, completely intending to decapitate her in the opening seconds to prove his vicious point to the screaming masses. He planted his massive lead foot, his immense shoulder muscles bulging violently under the harsh lights, and he threw it, the exact, devastating right power hook she had agonizingly studied for hundreds of hours in the dark. The punch was a terrifying blur of raw, unadulterated violence, carrying enough kinetic force to shatter a concrete block. But in Maya's meticulously trained, hyper-focused perception, the entire chaotic world instantly violently slowed down to a crawling, cinematic, bullet-time crawl. She saw the heavy, sweeping trajectory. She saw his hips overly commit. And just as the grueling, endless tape study had promised, she saw his left hand lazily, arrogantly drop exactly 2 infinitesimal inches. It was all the space she needed. She didn't retreat. She didn't block. She flawlessly, perfectly slipped completely to the outside, her head moving exactly a fraction of an inch from the devastating trajectory of his flying fist, feeling the sudden, violent rush of displaced air graze her cheek. She dropped her center of gravity sharply, her lead foot pivoting with the terrifying practiced speed of a striking cobra, instantly transferring the immense solid energy of the canvas completely up through her calf, through her hip, through her tightly coiled shoulder, and straight into her right fist. As Marcus's momentum carried him hopelessly, dangerously forward, completely, totally off balance and entirely exposed, Maya's counterstrike launched with absolutely devastating, mathematically perfect precision. The connection was an explosive, sickeningly loud, cracking impact that echoed violently over the roaring, frenzied crowd, a sound like a heavy baseball bat shattering a wet log. Her knuckles drove perfectly, precisely, flawlessly into the exact, vulnerable sweet spot of his exposed jawline, instantly, violently scrambling his equilibrium and entirely shutting off his central nervous system before his brain could even begin to register the immense, shocking pain. His eyes immediately rolled back completely into his head, showing nothing but terrifying, blank white sclera. The roaring, arrogant titan was instantly transformed into a massive, heavily muscled rag doll, his massive body collapsing, crumpling, and crashing violently down onto the blood-stained canvas with a colossal, earth-shattering thud that actually violently shook the ringside announcer tables. Total, absolute, suffocating silence instantly fell over the massive, packed arena. 10 seconds. Exactly 10 perfectly executed, meticulously planned, beautifully violent seconds had passed since the ringing of the opening bell. The deafening, roaring crowd was suddenly, completely paralyzed, thousands of mouths hanging wide open in utter, disbelieving shock, completely unable to process the absolute, instantaneous destruction of their untouchable, privileged god. Marcus lay entirely motionless on the cold mat, his expensive oils mixing with the dirt, completely humiliated, utterly defeated, completely broken by the very same supposed weakness he had so arrogantly, loudly mocked. The referee, wide-eyed and physically trembling, rushed forward, frantically waving his arms to officially signal the absolute, undeniable end of the contest. Maya did not celebrate. She did not scream in triumph. She did not taunt the unconscious, fallen giant. She simply stood completely perfectly still, her chest barely heaving, her breathing returning to that slow, hypnotic, calm rhythm, looking directly over the top of the cage to where Uncle Silas stood quietly in the dark shadows of the corner. The wise old man simply offered a single, slow, deeply respectful nod, a quiet, profound acknowledgement of a lifetime of struggle, finally, spectacularly vindicated in the glaring, undeniable light of public truth. The silence of the arena finally shattered, breaking into a completely new, deafening, chaotic roar, not of bloodlust, but of total, absolute, mind-bending awe at the undeniable triumph of the ultimate underdog. You see that? You see exactly what happens when you arrogantly, foolishly underestimate the quiet, relentless, unyielding dedication of someone who has absolutely nothing to lose and absolutely everything to prove. Do not ever, ever mistake quietness for weakness, because the absolute hardest, most devastating hits in this entire world always, without fail, come from the exact places you arrogantly refuse to look. If this story lit a fire in your chest, if you felt that righteous, undeniable impact in your very bones, hit that like button, share this absolute masterclass with everyone who has ever been completely overlooked, and remember to always, always watch out for the quiet ones.